We begin the day with a warning to civilians in Russian-occupied eastern Ukraine. Get out while you can. Bombs and bloodshed are on the way. Ukraine's military is preparing an attack to win back territory that is still occupied by Russia. The messaging for civilians is frightening, and it's meant to be that way. But military analysts say the warnings could be an overabundance of caution mixed with some wishful thinking. Ukrainian forces are not able to launch a major attack because they are still waiting for weapons. Delivery will take weeks, we're told. In the meantime, Russian troops are expected to inch their way forward with no let-up in the fighting. Consider the words of the governor from the eastern region of Luhansk. Everything that can burn is on fire. Around 95% of that region is now under Russian control. Severodonetsk is a focus of the attacks. Amid fierce fighting, Ukrainian forces say they have held a chemical plant in the city where about 500 civilians are thought to be sheltering. The Luhansk governor has also warned that Russia is preparing an even bigger offensive in the region. Well, Western countries have been delivering increasingly heavy weapons to Ukraine to help it fight back against Russian aggression. And those deliveries include heavy field artillery. Multiple rocket launcher systems have also been promised. Among other equipment that Germany is providing, 7 high-tech mobile artillery units to Ukraine. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry says those have now arrived and form part of the country's arsenal. It's no surprise, no news. Germany has faced criticism for perceived foot-dragging over sending weapons to Ukraine. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz again today underlined Berlin's commitment to supporting Ukraine.
Russia's relentless war of aggression against Ukraine is a fundamental blow to peace in Europe and a blatant breach of international law. It represents an epochal upheaval in Europe and the world, a turning point for all of us. Ukraine belongs among us. It belongs to the European family. A milestone on this preconditional European path is the status of an accession candidate. The EU member states will be discussing this in the next few days. Germany is in favour of a positive decision in favour of Ukraine, and I will push for a unified position at the European Council. And it's quite clear that we will continue to support Ukraine. We will continue to support Ukraine with weapons for as long as Ukraine needs our support.
Well, my first guest tonight knows both worlds of Ukrainian diplomacy and Ukrainian big business. Alexander Scherba is a former ambassador to Austria from Ukraine and is currently chief advisor to the CEO of Naftogaz, that's Ukraine's state energy company. He's also the author of Ukraine versus Darkness. That's a collection of essays based on the 2.5 decades that he spent as a career diplomat and speechwriter for Ukrainian leaders. Mr. Scherba, it's good to have you on the program tonight. Let me ask you this question on gas. If Ukraine wants to prevent Russia from earning money on gas exports, why isn't Ukraine preventing Russian gas from transiting across Ukrainian territory, or is that the case?
Thank you for having me. Well, the answer is very simple because we know that countries like Germany, Austria still need the gas. The company's policy and the company's position and the position of many our co-workers, quite frankly, is clear. Russian gas there should be a gas embargo on Russia and oil embargo on Russia, but we don't want to be the ones who just cut through. We need Germany, Austria, and other countries to do it on themselves, on their own. And I think they are approaching that right decision, introducing gas embargo. And then, of course, Ukraine will play along.
And let me ask you too, Mr. Scherba, just to clarify for our viewers, is Ukraine still receiving transit fees from Russia when that gas or oil crosses its territory? I mean, are you making money?
Yes, surreal as it sounds, yes, it's correct. We are fulfilling our contractual obligations as a gas transit country between Russia and the European Union. We are not taking and buying Russian gas since 2015, I think, but we are transiting the Russian gas. That's correct.
We know that Ukraine is paying a huge price for its sovereignty and its freedom right now. Casualties in the fighting are huge. Is the military aid, is it getting through, sufficiently? Are you convinced that Western countries are committed to helping Ukraine win this war?
We believe in our partners in the West. We are confident that they understand the nature of this war, that we are fighting for our freedom, and we have no other way but to keep fighting, because we know what will happen once we stop. There will be no Ukraine, there will be no Ukrainian language, there will be no our freedom. There was actually a rather remarkable article published in Moscow at the early stage of this war. It was titled "What We Should Do with Ukraine." And it said very clearly that it should be a genocide of Ukrainians. It spoke about Ukraine's collective guilt and collective punishment that it deserves for at least one generation. So we have no other way but to fight. Like our foreign minister said, even if we don't get the weapons, we'll fight with spades.
Well, an article in the New York Times today reports that U.S. officials are briefing that the weapons Ukraine has received or is receiving will help it to hold on to its territory. Do you agree with that? Is that enough for your country in terms of ending this conflict satisfactorily?
Well, the Lend-Lease program on the part of the United States is open-ended. So there is no clear limit to what Ukraine needs to receive and will receive. I hope we indeed will receive whatever it takes. We know that what was already agreed upon is a lot, and it can make huge difference on the front line. The problem is it hasn't, for the most part, hasn't come yet from the United States and from many European countries, including, unfortunately, Germany. Although today there was a huge news that finally German howitzers arrived in Germany, and for that we thank from the whole heart.
I want to ask you about perceptions of Russia. French President Emmanuel Macron, he has been reminding people, particularly last week, that Ukraine will have to negotiate with Russia in the end. Is there a rift between Ukrainian perceptions of Russia and how Western countries such as France see Russia?
Well, I think everybody is changing their perception of Russia after this war. Everybody who had any kind of trust into Russia's rationality or civility has to rethink and reconsider the ways he or she saw Russia in the last couple of decades. So on Ukraine's part, I can say, as someone who never was enemy of Russia, Russia is dead for me, like for many, many Ukrainians. It will never forget whatever good was connecting our two countries and two nations. It has been destroyed in these 3 months of this almost 4 months of this barbaric war. But Macron is right in the way that at certain point we will have to negotiate. Only we'll negotiate when Putin is forced to negotiate. And he will be forced to negotiate only when he feels that he's losing the war. And that might take a while, I'm afraid.
What's your take on what we continue to hear from some German lawmakers and policymakers that Europe, Germany should not push Vladimir Putin too far because we still want to be able to negotiate with them when this war is over. Are they guilty of giving an aggressive Russia a future-free pass?
Absolutely. They are guilty. They are guilty of allowing Putin to grow and to become this monster. They are guilty of not listening to what Ukraine was saying for years about Putin's plans. They are guilty of selling the soul of Europe to this monster in Moscow and embracing him while he was planning this war. And if they're saying right now that we should be careful about the emotions of this insane, cynical, evil person in Moscow, then once again, they are guilty. They are guilty of being either foolish or greedy or not courageous enough.
And despite all of that, Mr. Scherba, the European Union is expected this week to grant Ukraine candidacy status to one day become a member of the EU. I mean, given that this process is likely to take years, sometimes it can take decades, why is this official recognition, why is it so important for your country?
Because this war is about freedom, freedom to be what we want to be. And we want to be with Europe. We want to be like Europe. We want to be a success like Europe. And just to be recognized, just to have this our wish officially recognized by the European Union, knowing how distant Europe was from that point just 4 months ago, it means a lot. It's the right symbolism at the right moment to the right country, to the right nation.
I know that you have worked with Ukrainian leaders since independence 31 years ago. How would you describe President Volodymyr Zelensky's leadership at the current time? I mean, he is a wartime president.
So we are immensely proud of him. Like Ukrainian-American journalist Vladislav Davidson said, Zelensky is a hero. Who knew? And he said it he tweeted it jokingly, but indeed, President Zelensky is a hero for many, many people, for many Ukrainians like myself. We'll never forget the day of February 24th when we went to bed hearing these planes, Russian planes flying over Kyiv, and not knowing to which kind of reality we will wake up tomorrow, and then waking up next day and seeing President Zelensky sending this message, hello Ukrainians, I'm here, I stayed, I don't need a ride, I need ammo. And that was the moment when we started really, really believing in victory.
Alexander Scherba, we've covered a lot of territory tonight, but there's still much more to talk about. We hope that you can join us again here on the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for more now, I want to go to our colleague, Emmanuel Schatz. She is in Kyiv tonight. Emmanuel, let's talk about these important heavy weapons that Ukrainian forces are waiting for. Today was an important delivery day, wasn't it?
Exactly. In fact, Germany had promised it would deliver heavy weapons, and it had been a bone of contention between Kiev and Berlin as the weeks and months passed, and there was no sign of those howitzers in particular here in Ukraine. So the fact that they arrived today along with trained Ukrainian soldiers who are trained in Germany, well, this is a boost for the morale of the Ukrainian armed forces. They've been saying time and again they need heavy weapons. Of course, those German howitzers won't do all the job, but it's better than nothing. It's better than no heavy weapons at all. And it certainly reinforces the trust between the two countries. So definitely a morale boost. And hopefully, they will be put on the front line where it's direly needed, on this eastern front line where the last few days have seen an increased fighting.
Yeah, Emmanuel, talk to me about the situation on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. What do we know?
Well, it appears that Russia, through its reserves in its latest bid to try and conquer all of Luhansk, it almost dominates everything there. If we talk about the city of Severodonetsk, for example, it's almost completely Russian, occupied by Russian right now. By Russian troops right now. There's only this chemical plant we were mentioning earlier in the report, where hundreds of civilians are trapped, and there's no way into Severodonetsk, and there's no way out either, because the bridges leading to the city and the highway leading to the city have been destroyed by heavy shelling. And on both sides, both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, the armed forces are suffering heavy losses. So a situation that has dramatically escalated, and Ukrainian armed forces warn that the next couple of days will show decisive battles for the domination of Donbass.
And what about the situation for the suburbs around Kiev, where you are? I know that you've been visiting Kiev's suburbs. They were damaged extensively at the beginning of this war. What have you been seeing?
Well, Brent, it's been heartbreaking to see Irpin, to see Hostomel, where also possible war crimes were committed. Those are the places where regularly the forensic teams, the Ukrainian forensic teams, are uncovering mass graves and proofs through testimonies of what has happened when Russian troops went through. They retreated 2 months ago already, but when you drive through, when you walk through those towns, you see the pictures of desolation, you see destroyed buildings everywhere. So this will take years to rebuild, even knowing how resilient the Ukrainian people are. This is just scenes of desolation and no end in sight, knowing that most of the eastern part and southern part of the country are still subjected to indiscriminate shelling on residential areas in particular.
Our correspondent Emmanuel Schaz reporting tonight from Kiev. Thank you. And for more now, I'm joined by Chris Doherty. He's a weapons and defense specialist at the Center for a New American Security in Washington, D.C. Chris, it's good to have you on the program. Let me get your take on the battle against time here. I mean, we're hearing from the Ukrainian military that their soldiers still have to wait several weeks until they have the weapons that they need to launch a counteroffensive against the Russians. Does that mean that the Russians, for the time being, have the upper hand?
I think so, as far as the battle for places like Severodonetsk and Lysychansk go. In that portion of the Donbass, there's such a significant concentration of Russian artillery that no matter what the Ukrainians do, they're going to be facing overwhelming fires. We've seen numerous reports of what that does to the combat forces in those areas and how difficult it is for them to hold on to that terrain.
We're 4 months into this war, and today we saw the first delivery of German heavy weaponry in Ukraine. How significant is today?
In and of itself, not terribly significant, but as part of a larger pattern of Western aid to the Ukrainians, I think it is quite significant. I think what we're going to see increasingly is ever more capable Ukrainian forces operating Western rather than former Soviet equipment, with higher capabilities, with more effective targeting, with longer ranges, with better communications capabilities. And in theory, that should allow the Ukrainians to offset Russian advantages in total manpower, the number of armored fighting vehicles, and the number of artillery tubes.
Is that going to allow Ukrainian forces to push Russian forces back, or are we talking about static front lines here for the foreseeable future?
I think you're going to see static front lines for the foreseeable future, but I think the Ukrainians will be able to strike in depth behind the Russian front lines in a way that they may not be able to right now. So rather than continually ceding ground to a slow, grinding Russian offensive like we've seen in Severodonetsk, you're going to see an even more static line where the Ukrainians are holding their ground, potentially even counterattacking in some limited places. But they simply right now, and for the foreseeable future, don't have the mass of fighters and equipment necessary to create a breakthrough and then exploit it.
So are we headed, though, eventually to a place where there will be a clear winner here, a victor? Will Ukraine be able to claim victory, or are we looking here at a protracted war of attrition?
I think we're looking at a protracted war of attrition. I wish I could say otherwise, but the facts as they stand on the ground, the quantity of forces arrayed, and the static nature of the lines at this moment suggest to me that we're in for much more fighting like this. And I think the question going forward is less the exact number of fighters at the front or the number of weapons being delivered on either side, but what are the long-term implications of political will and economic steadfastness of the two sides?
Yeah, I think the calendar is going to be long and heavy, and I'm sure we'll be talking again. Chris Doherty from the Center for a New American Security in Washington, D.C. Chris, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.